All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, based on the part of the world that you're in. Thank you so much for joining us at Rethinking Legal Ops, our episode where we discover and explore today as to how AI and legal tech can help accelerate clean power projects or just in general infrastructure projects. And to discuss this today, we have Chris here. Chris is an attorney from Chris is an attorney from Ghana. He's got extensive experience working in the infrastructure, environmental project implementation, real estate sector, and energy project implementation sector. And he's also a dear colleague from Berkeley Law. So super excited to have you here, Chris. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Ashra. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And so I'll jump in right away. So as we know, today we're mostly talking about emerging economies, which sort of make up countries in the world which has like the highest economic growth and development happening at the moment, and some of the fastest growing populations. So there's a huge need for the infrastructure and also for energy to keep up, because we do know there's those things are a little bit lagging behind in comparison to growth levels in these countries. So Chris, before we jump into any of that, I think it will be hopeful to have a little bit more visibility into, as we know, large projects can have several moving parts. So from a legal perspective, can you give us a broad overview of the different steps a large infrastructure, whether that's energy, whether that's real estate, needs to go through before it gets to its COD, the commercial operation date? And that's mostly from a legal perspective.
Okay. So generally, with regards to infrastructure projects, there are mainly four stages in the project's lifeline. So there's the conceptualization, that is where the project is actually developed, and then there is the project implementation or the project construction, and then there's the project operation and maintenance stage, and then there's the exit stage. That is like the final stage where a company may decide that, oh, this is time for me to go. A lender may decide they want to refinance, and that's it. um, what we are talking about, like from your question, is you would want to know what actually happens at the project conceptualization stage. And that stage is usually like the background stage where lots of people don't actually see it, because the resources that are used are sometimes in-house. So this is the project development stage, the R&D stage, where a company comes about with an idea, sees an opportunity, and wants to take advantage of that opportunity. So this stage of the project is developed in-house, where you use in-house resources to ascertain the regulatory framework, to ascertain the level of the consultants you're going to use, governmental projects. And then this is where you get budget up, and then you send it out. Then you go for budget approval, and then it is approved. So at this stage, there's a broad checklist that is developed at the background, where of possible sites, there is the financing objectives, that is whether you're going to use debt or equity, you're going to use corporate finance, or you're going to use project finance. There is the various scope of their consultancy, because this is necessary. And then there's the regulatory framework that you also have to ascertain whether this idea is feasible or not. And then there is the design, then you tailor the specifications. Once you tailor the specifications and you have budget approval, that's when you go to the RFP, where you issue the make requests for tenders, and people tend the consultant. And then from that stage, then mostly it's the project company is mostly incorporated. And once it's incorporated, then it's the project company that actually contracts with the various parts of it. And a very important part of it also is that, especially for energy projects, this is the stage where you must make sure that you have your power purchase agreement. Because the power purchase agreement, in actual sense, is the lifeline of the project. You must be sure that you're going to get enough revenue to pay up the investments that you're putting in. And then it's lasting for a long time enough so that you're able to pay the various annuities that you're going to get. And then for real estate projects, you must also make sure that, yes, this is where you confirm whether you have title to the land, whether you have an SP or an MOU, where you are certain that, yes, you have the land at least for you to implement the project. And then the last thing is where you, at the last phase, this is where you go for a second opinion. At this stage, you then have engaged your external consultants, and then they would confirm whether the parameters that were set out by your internal experts are correct. So at this stage, you actually engage those external parties, and they come in and they confirm that yes, this is so. And then you then move into the financing. So at least you have your lenders on board. You might not have reached financial close, but then at least you have them on board, and then you have executed all the various contracts. And the final checklist is drawn and the timeline is set. So once the checklist is drawn, the timeline is set, then it becomes a project management. You know who is coming in at what time, what has to be done at what time, and then it follows through before implementation. So these are the things that you need to do usually before the implementation starts. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really hopeful, and it's comprehensive and it's brief at the same time, the way you put it. So thank you so much for that. And when I hear all the different moving parts, the different levels that a project has to go through, and the different involvement kinds of involvement of the several entities, I'm thinking about the different types of documentation that is created in this, right? Which is it is massive. You know, I can see from your spot, you've probably been starting out in your career when you were like a young attorney, we still are, but like, when you were like starting out, like junior attorney, I'm sure you remember like being stuck in a room, having to do like all of that doc review. So it leads me to the next question. Can you list or talk a little bit about the different types of major contracts or documents that are signed, negotiated, executed in this, or even involved in this entire process?
Okay, great. Okay, so basically at this stage, that's where like you have the NDAs, the non-circumvention agreement. Usually that's like the very first agreement. Some project companies even let their internal staff resources sign the NDAs because there's a challenge as to when the idea is produced from the whole process, who can use the idea, who owns the idea. So once you have the NDA, the non-circumvention, you are certain that the company still owns the work and what the work can be used for. So the NDA is usually like the first step. And whenever you're discussing with people, negotiations, everything is the NDA. Then the second bit is the technology license agreement. Sometimes the infrastructure projects involve the use of a particular technology, and you might not necessarily have that technology, own that technology. So in order for you to make use of it, you have to go to the persons who have the proprietary ownership of it, and then you get the permission to get it done. Then the next one is that one is I think it's standard. That's the like the shareholders agreement or joint venture agreement, because at that stage you are looking for your partners who you're gonna have the arrangement with, the equity ownership, what they can do, what they cannot do, who can appoint the board, and all of that. Then there's the engagement letters. The engagement letters is where usually when you're a lawyer you come in, because at that point then they'll be engaging you as a lawyer. They'll be asking you for a quote, how much it's gonna cost for you to do this, and then they give you your scope, and then you move from there. Then there's a PPA, which is necessary for all energy projects, and or the offtake agreements. In some real estate projects, generally you have off-takers. Like the government can decide to just buy all the 500 units that you're going to take, and this is going to be actually the basis upon which you're going to get a funding. Because if it's especially a project financing arrangement, what the financier is going to look at is how you're going to pay me. Is this project viable enough to pay me enough? So that is important. Then there's the land use agreement, because you can have a PPA, you can have all the various drawings and everything, but if you don't have any ground land to implement the project, it's zero. So the next thing is you trying to negotiate the land lease agreement, or sometimes an MOU, so that at least the lease commences after financial close. And then you have the financing term sheet, where you negotiate the term sheets with regards to the financing and what that's at what
The
point in
most
time.
fun part there.
Yeah. And then there's the EPC contractor, the guy going to do like the hardcore work and everything. In project financing and usually in real estate projects, we don't like several moving parts. So usually we just like maybe a 10-key arrangement. We make sure that, the price is locked in, the tenor is locked in, the various guarantees and assurances. And it's important at this stage that you have good performance and good performance guarantees, because when the EPC contract messes up, the whole project is thrown overboard, and it's and then there's sometimes the operation and maintenance agreement or operation and management agreement. Usually with real estate projects, for the purposes of tax structuring, the project itself might not be
Just went for a
hello.
second. Oh yeah, yeah, you're back.
Yeah, yeah, I'm back. Sorry. So usually it has with. Oh, sorry. I think my internet is sorry. So usually it's the O&M arrangements. That's where like the sponsor gets the money back to operate the arrangements and what have you. Then there's a supply agreement. Assuming you have a power plant and then you need gas, LNG, you need a viable source or a reliable source to make sure you have the supply enough to power the project. And then there's the permits and licenses where you have discussions with the government regulatory body to make sure that you have all of that. Those are negotiations. And there's several guarantees. Sometimes it's the parent company guarantee, there's the sovereign guarantee, there's an insurance guarantee, and all of that. And then the final one is the financing agreement. Usually it can start with a bridge finance, which is more or less like a construction loan. And then at finance close or at a particular point T, then you have the actual financier who comes in and takes about the project, refinances it, and then pays off the bridge financier and then the project. So these are the main things. That's the moving parts. That's I think the main agreements that you have to execute. Yeah, I didn't catch that.
I was muted. Sorry. I was saying that just a few documents, right? Not too many at all. Like
That's okay. That's
totally,
okay.
you could totally handle it. But imagine how nice it would be if you didn't have to physically go through each of those documents, and like a lot of that could just be automated from because from what you've listed, it's at least 12 to 14 of these documents, right? And then
Yeah.
there's several of each. So like average power project, like we're talking like about like 40 of these. If it's like a mid-sized project, then that's just for a mid-sized project. For a large project, it's the hundreds.
Exactly.
So my next question is, how much of this, how many of these documents are more or less like standardized? Like they remain the same through different types of projects. Like almost like following a template.
Something. Yeah. Yeah. I think that with regards to most of these contracts, usually the NDAs standardized. Most of the contracts are actually standardized. If you look at the technology license agreement, the shareholders agreement, essentially all these agreements are usually standardized. The land lease agreement is standardized. But I think one of the most important thing is trying to tie in all the risk together along all the agreements that you are trying to execute. So the timelines for all of them must tie in. The risk allocation with regards to it has to be has to be moving in conjunction with it. So I get where you're coming from. Sometimes it is it's actually just some particular moving parts that you are doing, or depending on the particular kind of structure of the infrastructure project and where the risk lies. Then those are the only things that moves. It's not the actual substantive agreement that moves, but it's just those key things that change. So yes, I think AI in that standard point can actually come in and then help us with regards to that. And it brings me back to an issue of costing, because generally in infrastructure projects, there are some costs that are fixed that you cannot change, like the construction prices, the cost of buying the main equipment for the project, the cost of buying the land, building materials, and all of that. You can change them. But then sometimes what you can actually change is the consultancy fees. And these consultancy fees sometimes are hourly. So if you're in house, what you're looking at is how you can maximize your maximize the fees that you are paying for as much work that can be done. And if you are an external counsel, you are also looking out for how much you can make enough for the less time that you're dedicating to this project. So I think that the, even though external counsels would prefer hourly, some are okay with a fixed rate. So assuming that they're able to review your work for 5 hours, they're charging you maybe, let's say, assuming it's $100,000. In the estimates they give you, they are estimating that they're going to use 20 hours to review all your documents, and then you agree on a lump sum fee of $100,000. If the external counsel uses 1 hour, it's $100,000. If he uses 25 hours, it's $100,000. And for me, me in house. I'm also thinking about now at least I have some certainty with regards to budgetary requirements. So I know that my legal fees is set as $100,000. So it's a win-win situation. I don't think that AI is gonna take away the role that external counsels are gonna take, because it's possible that external counsels would also implement AIs, and then they're gonna use the AIs to make their work more effective, and then to make spend less time and make more money. So assuming,
Absolutely.
yeah, exactly. So assuming that they are implementing 24 projects and then it's 20 hours, they're just going to be able to do all of that within a short period of time and make more money. And then me in-house, I'm also going to be sure that at least I have my bottom line met. There are not going to be any surprise fees and what have you. So I think that those are the roles that AI is going to come in. It's not going to be, I don't think it's going to necessarily change the roles that people are going to be playing, but then it's going to make us more effective.
Mhm.
And the bottom line is going to make us more money.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
making more money, like I love that. And like if effectiveness, efficiency, and ultimately making more money and creating more certainty for in-house legal departments. And, I fully agree with, everything you're saying. I also am from the school of thought that AI is, and legal tech is not necessarily meant to replace lawyers. It is meant to work with lawyers and, augment their, functions. Like as a lawyer, and I'm sure you can relate with this as well. I prefer to do more sort of like that advising, that sort of like interesting work. It's not the most enjoyable thing to read standardized documents again and again to get the gist of it. Over time, you learn to look at specific parts, but in my mind, if I can just optimize that process, have some sort of artificial intelligence and natural language processing, which is what we also do at Speed Legal to automate that process for me, that as an external counsel, it helps me make more money by
Yeah.
putting in less time and less effort. And for an in-house, it creates more of a certainty that you're not going to get, a much larger bill because something happened and then they had to spend an extra 10 hours. The process is much more streamlined. So, I fully agree with you with everything you're saying. And you already answered my next question, but I want to ask you what kind of legal tech solutions that are, that exist today that you can see yourself using, or the ones that excite you the most.
Nice. I think that now for an in-house counsel, most of the legal tech solutions you'll be looking out for will be some project management softwares, and also like standardized contracts. So for instance, I work for a company that we have like around 60, we are looking to be selling around 400 residential units at a particular point in time every year. That's the budget. So you're looking at me doing 600 leases in a year.
Wow.
So that's like 50 a month. Assuming I would be doing that and reviewing it from time to time and I don't have a standardized template, that means that it would be practically impossible for me to achieve this. Because taking the leases alone, and assuming I'm using 20 hours, that's me using approximately 100 hours 1,000 hours on the leases, generating the leases alone. Aside all my compliance work, contract management work, it's impossible. So it's the AI that would make it probable and possible for me to achieve this. The second bit has to do with the several moving parts of these leases. There are several notice periods in these leases. Supposed to be making sure that there's compliance with regard to infrastructure agreements. That is the construction of roads, construction of other things, making sure that all guarantees have not expired, insurances are not expired, regulatory requirements are not expired. it's the AI that's gonna supposed to be assisting me, telling me that it's time for me to issue a notice. It's possible. I understand that it's possible that even there currently are even processes that the AI will just issue, the software will just issue the notices and notify me that this issue has been notified. The AIs would have a checklist and then would prompt me on the timeline in which I'm supposed to do what and have to do that. So as an in-house counsel, I see it as it's especially with infrastructure projects where you have a lot of time sensitive things that have to be done. It's key. It's something that I think that I can do without it, looking at time periods, because there are several infrastructure projects that have failed and several financiers have lost a lot of money just because an insurance bond, an insurance guarantee has expired a day earlier than a default.
Yeah,
So
and it's so easy to miss something like that because, like the fine print of the documents. And that's where we start talking about human error, right? Because a lot of these tasks are just so tedious. It takes so much time. And that, with that, like, I think with every hour that we work, and like the more tired we get, the chances of us erring or like, making like a blunder
yep,
significantly increases.
exactly.
Yeah. So, it reminds me of like a similar type of work, that we're also, doing at like Speed Legal. And I think it's like quite relevant, especially to like quick implementation of projects. It's like risk analytics, right? Like what if you had a tool which could, also like compare, whatever document you had and you wanted to say compare to a standard. And then, for your purposes, you didn't want to have to go through all the, like the fine print of the document and just be able to identify those things, like see if it's all in compliance. How much do you think that will help with like a quicker implementation of a project and prevent cost overruns, which is a huge problem when we're talking about infrastructure projects, especially in developing countries. In India, we have that problem, and yes, curious to hear what you see in Ghana as well.
I think I, I think with Ghana we have that problem as well, especially when you start the project. Because of that, usually when budgeting for project, you have a sizable amount of miscellaneous. That is assuming that anything goes in, then you have that miscellaneous fund to tap into. But then that is why I think that with regards to speed legal, the product speed legal, for instance, let me give you the history. In Ghana, for instance, right before we actually had computers, I mean, we still had computers, but before we actually moved into soft, softwares and what have you could only get the precedents from the books. So you buy like an encyclopedia of precedents and then you have it. So whenever you have a project, what you do is you go and you open the encyclopedia and then you go through and then you check which one actually complies with what you have to do. And then you type it from there. You don't actually. So some law firms, some law firms like the law firm I subsequently worked, the last law firm I worked with, which has an impressive it's has an impressive it dedicates some time or some of its resources in developing the digital framework of the law firm, one of the few law firms that does it. So what it did was that instead of just typing it out, it started also creating a database, a precedent database, which is already electronic. So first of all, so it cut down the timeline in which you're supposed to sort of go look out for the encyclopedia, now type it all out, and then you do what it is. So with the digital database, where you're starting from is you already have the soft copy and then you just tweak it out. And I think where we are going is now you have the soft copy. All you do is you just type in the key things like these are the key parameters, and then the AI just does everything for you. And then you have it within a few seconds. So it makes it effective. But with Ghana, I think that in Ghana generally, with regards to the compliance framework, some of the things that the AI can do is, for instance, if you enter into a territory, like you enter into Ghana, you're going to do an infrastructure project, and you put in Ghana, it can tell you the key checklist, the things you need to do, and estimated timeline and estimated cost that have to be done. So compliance-wise, then we have anti-money laundering issues, which you must make sure that how the money is going to come through is actually properly done. So maybe instead of asking a local council to advise you on that. You have speed legal that tells you what you must be done. The other thing is you have the local content regulations because every country has sort of more or less has kind of a local content requirement. So there are some quotas that are set if you're come to do a particular project in a particular industry. So what's assuming that you would get from, let's say, a speed legal is a speed legal will tell you that when you click Ghana and you're going into an energy project or what have you, this is what you need, just like that. You don't need to go and do an extensive, and then there's some things such as ownership parameters. Every country has different ownership land tenure systems. And for instance, in America, right, you have um, the, the insurance, the insurance companies that warrant that title insurance. In Ghana, we don't have a title insurance over there. So you are going into an industry where you don't have that certainty. You know that you have an insurer that is going to back it. So you cannot just go like that. So all these are understandings that you get with speed legal. And then there are some things such as insurances that you need. There are some local content requirements such as registration. There are environmental considerations. These are also there are land use and special planning permits that you need. There are also immigration and employment matters that come in. There's a tax registration element. There's a pension and all of that. So I think what SPDA will give you at the onset of the project, especially assuming that you are doing the project implementation stage where you are supposed to rely on your internal resources, is you having that software or that AI that tells you or gives you the one-stop shop at that point. And it gives you some certainty. And it makes you understand from the word go whether what you are developing is possible, is workable, is bankable, and is achievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and having those sort of initial like analytics about whether like something is viable or not, whether like the contract is too risky, whether you should even bother going to like external counsel, like paying money to have them reviewed. I think that's a game changer, especially for small and mid-sized construction firms or in-house.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
agree?
It is. It actually is a game changer. Because and I know it's that is one of the reasons why generally external counsels are a little bit, shaking about the use of AI because they are a little bit worried that like sometimes like a quick opinion, like advice could generate you some small cash. And the fear is that that might be lost. But I don't think necessarily that would be lost because I think there's a stage in the project whereby they're going to necessarily need a confirmatory opinion, confirmatory notes here and there, and a second opinion here and they'll still make their money rather than getting two opinions from two different lawyers because generally sometimes
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I don't really know what the future holds, but I think what we have right now, I don't think that can like completely get rid of, someone's need to go to like external counsel or like have to have like lawyers' eyes looking at documents. I think that's still something that's very important. And we may be biased because both of us are like lawyers, like but curious to hear from the audience as well. Like, what do you all think? Do you think AI is going to replace lawyers or especially like large infrastructure projects. Or if you have any questions for Chris here, based on everything that we've talked about the different types of documents that are involved in the project implementation. We've talked about the different moving parts and how complicated that is, and we've discussed at length the role of AI in optimizing that review process, and where companies like Speed Legal can and come in and help. And I like how you put it, like help like legal operations and in-house teams become more effective, more efficient, more accurate, and ultimately, make everyone more money. So now I'll open it up to the audience to ask any questions. I can't really see anyone, so you could type a question in the chat, or we'll give it a second. But Chris, I'm also in general curious because now you are at Berkeley Law. You're also studying
Yeah.
American law. Do you see? So Ghana is a common law country as well, from what I
Yes.
understand. Makes
Yeah, this
sense.
is a common.
Yeah, the same. We all got us from the same the same place.
Yeah. And I think I know where you're coming from, but I see some parameters. Like I see some. I think with regards to Ghana, I think that some projects are unnecessarily over securitized because I think that, for instance, the use of guarantees over here is in the extreme. Like, I mean, it's only really, really the extreme circumstances. The use of non-recourse loans are like on the high. But with regards to um, in Ghana, like it's standard practice. Like it's like you cannot do a project financing without like a parent company guarantee or without like several guarantees coming
Yeah.
in because yeah, there's some uncertainty. Maybe because of political risk, there's not uncertainty like mm, maybe something such as exchange currency hedging and what have you. But aside that, I think things are purely similar, and maybe the title issues. Yeah.
Yeah, we also had another lawyer from another emerging economy, Vietnam. He told us something similar as well. And I can speak for like India. I've seen something similar happen in India. A lot of the stuff is largely standardized because in a lot of large projects, government is involved, and you need those sort of like sovereign guarantees and like parent company like guaranteeing the liability, the financial liability of a project. So I think that's why there's a huge role for AI and legal tech to jump in there as well, because I think like time is money, and beyond money, I think like in emerging economies at the moment there is a huge need for implementing projects quickly, because there's a willingness to implement these projects. There's foreign players who do want to go and like spend money and build these projects and operate them. It's just a matter of trying to get rid of as many uncertainties as we can. And what do you think? Do you think like legal tech can, to what extent can legal tech help get rid of those uncertainties? We've talked about money, we've talked about the human effort, but what about the uncertainty of like time and things like that?
I think that it's similar to when how the insurance brokers are able to, or the actuaries, how they're able to calculate risk and effectively predicts the outcome of certain things. And that is why I think that speed legal is gonna come because with time, speed legal is going to identify the problematic clauses, the clauses that result in a lot of disputes. And what it's going to do is it's going to predict or it's going to give you options to avoid those disputes or options to actually address those things. So that is where AI is going to come in because AIs will be able to analyze, let's say, those conflict clauses, 1,000 of them, and what was the outcome? How was it done? And the result is what is going to be the replacement of what actually exists. So for instance, apart from the timeline, there are some. A key thing with regards to infrastructure projects is how disputes is resolved and how quickly it is. And usually, you are trying to avoid disputes as much as possible, and trying to ensure that you have certainty as to in the event of a dispute. And that is how the financier is going to think about. My money is locked up here, and if there's a dispute and there's a holdup, what's going to happen to my money? How is it going to happen? What are the precedents that have happened in the instances where this is a risk? How is this resolved? Speed Legal is going to give you that because it's going to be analyzing thousands and thousands of documents, and then you're going to be setting that, oh, okay, this is how it's done. For instance, if you go into this jurisdiction, if you go to sub-Saharan Africa, these are the various disputes that arise, and then it gives you a solution. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that really resonated with me when you said that. Like, as you know, I do also research like nuclear power projects in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, and those types of disputes, not just between the different entities, but also like other like public community stakeholders and the government, and like the private investor, like the project, the operators, like a lot of whom tend to be like from like other countries. A lot of those disputes occurring can really derail the project. Like it can cause cost overruns, it could cause just unlimited holds and things like that. So I think just having that element of AI being there to take care of those risks, sort of like put everything in front of you in a streamlined manner, so there's not really much scope for like human error, not as many delays, and also perhaps more transparency. Do you think that legal tech can help maybe like in-house or like legal operations teams of investors, government, etc., become a little bit more transparent with other stakeholders with the type of like automation that it offers?
Well, yeah, I think we would achieve that because usually for AI sometimes to work, you need to put in some key things that's for the AI to generate the material that you need. Assuming if, for instance, you are talking about like a contract, at least the interest component is going to be there at the forefront. Who is supposed to bear which risk is going to be there at the forefront. Who has this obligation is going to be there, and other parties are going to key in the key, and then the AI will generate the contract. At the point that you have actually told us what has to be done, there's no ambiguity as to whose obligation is what because everyone is logged in,
Yeah.
and that is what we might achieve with that. The other thing also has to do with the calculation of interest and damages and what have you. Sometimes it is left to the discretion of like the judicial authority or the arbiter or whatever. If the arbiter is using an I mean, it sort of narrows the discretion that the arbiter may have in sort of pronouncing some judgment or making sure that liquidated damages are achieved. So I think that to some extent it might be limited. I don't want to go into the foyer of corruption and what have you because that's another story for another day.
A different webinar. They're like 2 hours. But yeah, I think they can help with like the, sort of those like representing everyone's interests and like encouraging more of those like good faith negotiations. And I do agree. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. I learned so much, and I am going to continue this discussion with you offline as well. But now we're hitting like our the time that we had for the webinar today. So thank you so much again, Chris, for joining. We've learned a lot from everything you told us about project implementation, not just in Ghana, but in general, like in Africa, you threw in a lot of information. Thank you so much for that. And really excited to see how AI legal tech can be used in Ghana, like perhaps in your work. I'd love to help you out with that. And in general, helping legal teams everywhere become much more efficient, and again, not to replace lawyers but to augment their functions. So thanks so much everyone for joining us today, and thank you very much again, Chris. I'll see you on campus hopefully, and we can talk more.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you. All right.
It's
Bye.
nice talking to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you next week. We are here for a weekly event, so and we'll see you next week. Thank you, Chris, very much.
Pleasure. Thanks. Bye-bye.